Please come into the ballroom space and have a seat. As you're making your way in, please know that there are some snacks on either side of the stage on the drink tables, either side of the auditorium. So please grab those, and if you would make your way to a seat as soon as possible. We'll get started in just about 2 minutes.
Anybody want a pen?
Thank you.
Wanted a pen?
I love one.
Anybody else? In case you want to write something down. There you go.
Thank you so much.
Beautiful. How many? How many more? Yeah, see? I know. There we go. Okay. Everybody else okay?
Being told to find my life.
I know it is. Thank you.
I'm just erasing without. I'm erasing without.
All right, welcome again. I'm very pleased to welcome you to our first part of a two-part plenary event here at ATHE 2018. The theme, Theaters of Revolution, Performance, Pedagogy, and Protest. This panel is the first of a two-part series, Revolutions in Pedagogy and Practice. And I'm thrilled with the collaboration of an extraordinary subcommittee of the conference committee for 2018, and especially with Monica White-Nudu for her collaboration in coordinating the panel that sits on the stage for us today. I want to thank her especially, as well as Karen Jean Martinson and Kathleen McGeever, who've worked really hard as conference committee members on this plenary. I'm going to just briefly introduce us, or introduce our moderator, and then turn it over to her. We're very grateful to Martine Key Green Rogers, who has agreed to lend her expertise to the moderation of this important conversation. And so without further ado, I'm going to turn the floor over to Martine.
Thank you. Hello. It's not. No, hello. Okay. Like all of them, as soon as they come into my presence, don't work. So, hi, my name is Martine Key Green Rogers, and I am the conference planner for the Dramaturgy Focus Group, as well as president of the Literary Managers and Dramaturgs of the Americas. Woo! I know every time I say dramaturgs, I just go, woo! So that's just going to happen. Everyone, please be aware. And I'm also an assistant professor at SUNY New Paltz. What I'm going to do is quickly run down our amazing panelists, and I will give you their name and their affiliation. And then we're actually just going to jump into this. I'm also going to give you a little bit of the structure of what we're going to do. What we're doing today is slightly unorthodox, but I think it'll make for a fun and dynamic conversation. We've turned our panelists into groups. And what will happen is I will sort of give a prompt theme, and they have given each other some prompt questions to consider. And so what will happen is Group 1 will start in the conversation, and then after about 15 minutes, we'll turn it over to Group 2, and Group 2 will then take their theme that I'll introduce, and then potentially rip off some things that they've heard from the first group and continue the deep dive with their theme and questions. And then after 15 minutes, we will then turn it over to the third group to do the same thing. And then we'll spend the first half hour of the second hour having them have a conversation about things that were provoked from the conversations that they heard. And then the last 30 minutes will be turned over to you to ask questions in response to what you've heard. Sound like a plan? Yes. Let's try this one more time. Sound like a plan? Yes. All right, let's do this. So next to me, of course, my bios are not in order, so I'm going to do a little bit of flipping. I have Jamie Galloon, who is the interim director of HowlRound. Oh, you're director now of HowlRound. Okay. Congratulations. And then next to her is Scott Reese, who is the head of performance at the University of Maryland. And then next to him is Monica Whiten-Dunu, who is the president of Black Theater Association and at Dartmouth College. Correct. Yeah. And then next is Teresa Eyring, who is the executive director of TCG, Theater Communications Group. And then next to her is Laura Penn, who is the executive director of the Stage Directors and Choreographers Society. And then next is Patricia Ibarra, who's the immediate past president of ATHE and at Brown University. And then next is, oh, where'd you go? Oh, I'm on the sheet. Nicole Hodges-Pursley, who's the associate dean for diversity at the University of Kansas. And then next is, where did you go? Okay, Keith Arthur Bolden, you can tell I'm working off multiple sheets. And he is a professor of Spelman College and a brilliant actor. And then after him is Kelvin Dinkins Jr., who's the associate dean / general manager of the Yale School of Drama and Yale Repertory Theater. And then next to him is Josh Abrams, who's president-elect of ATHE and the deputy dean of the Royal Central School of Speech and Drama at the University of London. And then last but certainly not least is Nicole Smart, who is the director of diversity at Actors Equity Association. Please join me in welcoming all of these amazing people to our stage. Oh, where's Magda? Where's Magda? Where's Magda? Is she? Oh. But she's on the screen, but not there. I'm so sorry. We also have via technology. Hopefully, she can hear us. Is Magda Romanska of Emerson College and the executive director of the Theater Times. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So, on that note, I am going to turn this over to our first group, who are they're directly next to me, and their theme is revolutions in pedagogical and professional spaces. So maybe the first prompting question that I will give before you start diving even deeper into the questions that you were given is, what exactly does a revolution look like in the space that you inhabit? So in your organization, what would that even look like?
Hello? Okay. So I think this actually extends a conversation I had in an earlier session where we were talking about revolutionary praxis and thinking about what does it mean to be a revolutionary in the academy. It sounds contradictory, but it doesn't have to be. And one thing to keep in mind, especially for women and people of color, is that those spaces were not designed with us in mind. They were actually designed to keep us out. So to be there is, in fact, revolutionary, number one. And how you choose to practice revolution within that space, I think, is very specific to each individual. It's got to look different. And like in the session earlier today, it's like I can walk in with my Black Lives Matter t-shirt and my fist up. That's how I feel in my heart. But I don't necessarily need to do that in order to be effective in what I'm trying to do in every instance. So I think it's a matter of having wisdom about what are the long-term and short-term goals that we're trying to achieve individually and collectively, finding ways to collaborate with other people who are like-minded and interested in supporting those initiatives, and having the courage to stand up and speak when you need to speak, and to do that in whatever way is most comfortable, well, not even comfortable, but most effective for who you are and what it is that you're trying to achieve. So revolution, I think, is going to look different for different people in different spaces, but it's absolutely necessary and critical in academia and professional theater now and forever.
It's interesting that you mention how things are set up, because I think that's one of the biggest challenges when thinking about how to stage a revolution in a peaceful way. And that is that the thing that so many of our structures were set up, and it's not necessarily structures that have existed for a long, long time. Sometimes you can create a structure that's difficult to change just with a few people who are meeting on a regular basis and have established like certain values and practices. But with the theater field, so TCG is the National Organization for Theater based in New York, and in the very early days, 1964, TCG was incorporated to serve about 40 theaters, and one of those theaters was the Free Southern Theater, which was the civil rights, the cultural wing of the civil rights movement. When I think now about over time, my organization trying to become more inclusive and include theaters that identify and practitioners in different ways, the biggest thing that I keep coming back to is just the revolution around power, which is who, and that sometimes seems it's hard for people to get their mind around what that means, but it means so many different things. It could be power of position, it could be power in terms of who holds resources, it means a lot, power in terms of who gets listened to. And right now, if we're going to make change, like I think about revolution as how do people really let go of and share power more. And that can be tough for people who are in a position for a long time, or an organization that's held a certain place for a long time.
Yeah, just to riff off that a little bit. So HowlRound, for those of you who don't know, we're a free and open platform for theater makers worldwide, and we seek to amplify progressive and disruptive ideas about theater and connect diverse practitioners. When I think about revolution from where I'm sitting, a lot of it has to do with the free flow of knowledge and information, specifically in the theater field, which is a lot of what we've been trying to do over the past 7+ years since our founding. Trying to create a space where anyone, regardless of social station or access to resources, is able to share knowledge and expertise that they hold with other theater makers, which, shouldn't be revolutionary, but on some level it is, in a field where, conferences can be prohibitively expensive, where you need to be invited into rooms often to be able to have access to how decisions get made, or, power on many different levels. So I think about kind of how, the wonders of the internet in this digital moment that we're in, to be able to provide us with connection as practitioners that we haven't had historically. Even as we sit here right now, little plug, we're live streaming this panel on HowlRound TV, right? It will be archived, it will be open and accessible. Yeah, surprise. No. And I think that, there's something to be said for the kind of self-organizing that can happen when you start allowing for that free flow of information. And I think about some of the most exciting movements that I've seen in the past couple years in the theater field, and a lot of them have to do with practitioners organizing across geography, across affiliations, to make movement and change happen. Things like the Ghostlight Project, things like Not in Our House, and now the Chicago Theater Standards that are moving along, things like the Latinx Theater Commons, things like the Jubilee. And I think there's a way in which, we're in a really exciting moment, because we can use technology to really connect us to not only still have impact locally, you know, and hopefully to deepen that local impact, but also to network together to be stronger together than we would be apart.
Thank you. I think of revolution in terms of the revolutionaries that do it. I'll talk specifically teaching at a predominantly white institution, but then have a directing career as a black director in Washington, D.C. I came to the University of Maryland because Harry Elam, who was there before me, which some of you guys might know, had left and they didn't have a black professor for 4 years. That was an all-white institution in PG County, which is a predominantly county of color. And it took 2 black students not to put up with this, and they went to administration. They said, you either find a person of color here or we're going to make a big stink. So if it wasn't for wonderful Alan Mingo that went on to Broadway and was leading Kinky Boots, I wouldn't have gone there. And they really specifically found someone, I was young at that time, over 20 years ago, that had the energy to fight the battle. And there were 2 students of color, 2 graduate students of color, Marcia Pendleton and Andre Harrington, that I took to the first BTN conference, and now we're heads of BTN. But it was probably Ralph Ellison, you know, open up the door for me and then I'll open up the door for others. And now we have over 30 students of color. We have a diversity group. Then it was to me also to make sure that I was getting other faculty of color in there. And once we had a strong enough support system, it filtered down to the students. And then I was working in an institution that was pretty much with a school of music, dance, theater, and the head of our Cleary Smith Performing Arts Center were all white men. And so even though we had started the revolution, it didn't go to the top. And now I'm happy to say that the director of the School of Theater, Dance, Performance Studies is a woman. For the last 2 years, they had their first black director of the School of Music, which was a huge undertaking for the school. And the Dean of Arts and Humanities, Dean Bonnie Dill, is a woman of color. So I saw the revolution happened at my school. And it's better for the students. We have such a diverse population, and in PG County, right outside of Washington, D.C., where you have a majority of people of color and really Latinx right now, those people are coming to see the shows that we're doing for them. So that's what a revolution looked like from the inside for me.
So sorry. So that's some very interesting ideas and things that are provoked. I think one of the things that I'm kind of curious of, do you all have any questions for each other? Because I know I have, my first thought was just listening to Scott talk. I was wondering, like, not to be like the Debbie Downer or ask that question, but I'm kind of curious, what were the roadblocks like, and how did you overcome those challenges? And I think I'm really more interested in how did you overcome the challenges?
So once again, it's okay to have diversity and inclusion when there's just a couple of y'all. But when you become a significant force, some of the non-students of color, how come we're doing one black play now? So what are the rest of the students? Well, you have 4 other plays to do. But then we did 2 black plays in 1 season. Oh my gosh. And it's not the faculty that hears it, it's the other students that hear it, which is really sad because, well, of course, Monica, you're going to get cast because, you know, we're doing the Colored Museum. And how about me? So that's the other side of, and that you find out with the theaters I'm working in also, as opposed to me coming in and doing the August Wilson play, you know, at Roundhouse Theater. Well, let's do pantomime that's really talking about the black and white issue. So instead of drive-by diversity, we're diversifying your theater. And the same thing with our students is finding multicultural shows so we can have the students work together so it wasn't you're either doing the Asian show or the black show, the Latinx show, but no, we're doing multicultural shows and then we're doing the other shows also. Does that answer that?
No, it's great. It's great.
Something I add to that is a lot of the barriers are often structural. And so a lot of the structure really has to change in order for there to be diversity, inclusion, and equity that's lasting and sustainable. And so that deals with the curriculum, you know, really thinking about what it is we're trying to teach and what material we use to teach that material. Thinking about the season selections, which shows we decide to produce and why, what types of outreach that we do, and do we do it beyond the show for by and about people of color? Are we always a welcoming space to encourage people to not just perform, but to develop in those roles behind the scenes as well? Because we really do have to start thinking about how, as educators, we are training not just people to go and work in the theater as it exists now, but to be leaders and change those spaces to be, more equitable, diverse, and inclusive. And even then, I think, and this language is not even adequate to explain all that it should be, but it's something that I think resonates for people right now.
Right.
But the barriers that we most need to address are structural, and changing hearts and minds, that's part of it, but it's not the only part. And so I'm really eager to get to dealing with the nuts and bolts of how we start to shift the curriculum and how we start to prepare students to be leaders in the field.
To riff off that a little bit in terms of structural barriers, looking at the field more broadly, I think one of the huge barriers that comes to mind is the inequity in funding, right? I mean, small, culturally based, culturally specific organizations need more money from the funders. There is bias there. There is, decades of predominantly white, large institutions getting all the resources, and if we really want to see structural change, that balance has to shift. There's just no way around it. And I'm hopeful that there's movement in the right direction, but it's not enough and it's not fast enough.
I wanted, all these points that have been raised are so great. I think the funding piece, I mentioned at Black Theater Network convening last week, we were talking about how, in terms of resources, that if you look at, in the theater ecology, in the professional nonprofit theater ecology, for example, the theaters that have the biggest budgets are the predominantly white theaters. And there is no, these are multi-million-dollar budgets in many cases, and theaters of color, meaning theaters, Black theater, Latinx theater, Asian American theaters, MENA, that those budgets never have been able to rise above, let's say, $5 million a year or something. And, how do you change that? Because we should have very large theaters that are not just white theaters. We should have large Black theaters, large Latinx theaters, if those communities and artists desire them. So how do you make change? Revolution is really applicable here. The other point I just want to make in response to what Scott said, and to some extent what Monica said as well, is we've really learned, I've really learned that you can start working to become more diverse and inclusive, and some organizations will say, we've hired 3 Black people, and we have 2 Latinx people, and 1 person on our board, and it's really important to think about the way that your organization is set up, and to think about equity and inclusion in terms of real systemic change, but doing it, we found ways of really engaging our staff and board in self-analysis and understanding, and really putting structures in place so that we can power share, and so that we can collectively make some decisions together in order to create more inclusive environments. But we're also still the institution that has certain aspects of our structure that are functioning in the old ways in order to complete business that we have to complete. So this is another thing where you're just thinking, okay, where is the point where we can completely overhaul? But I guess taking the first steps is important. Taking the first steps and building and deeply committing until you see the change.
Thank you. So I'm going to use that as a segue to our next group. So for our second group, part of what they were asked to think about is when professional norms and institutional structures clash with pedagogical innovation. So I guess in some ways, my first thought is, what does that even look like? I know it's a similar question, but what does that look like in your organization? And then what are the things that you've done in order to massage those ideas? You need an extra mic down there?
I wasn't talking, but I guess I will.
You don't have to answer that question. You can answer something completely
Well,
different.
my institution, I mean, two institutions. I think my principal institution is the University of Kansas, and I'm in the theater department. And then I would say my twin institution is the community theater where I'm a co-artistic director. So I would think the clashes come from different approaches to making art, that inhabit a particular unit. And so if you say that for the academic unit, you have a consortium of faculty and professional staff that have different ideological approaches to art making. And I think those clashes often end up obviously in faculty and staff meetings and all those kind of bureaucracies you have to navigate. But I think that there's a translation process between old and new guards, particularly between guards, new faculty that maybe work outside and then are bringing those new practices into the institution that has always done things a particular way. And then I think those type of concessions that you have to make to be able to kind of do that translation work often kind of combust when it surrounds issues of diversity, equity, and inclusion, because the people that can do the new work that are embodying those particular targets, say if you want to hire a person of color, the consensus making of who that person should be is as if they're like magical unicorns that you can only find, when you get the magical search. But diversity is.
Put the hand in the pipeline.
Yeah, I mean, diversity is not a thing. Diversity is the world. And I think once we stop approaching diversity as a problem that we have to fix versus a condition and a way of being and knowing, then we can actually start to make the structural progress that we really need to have the truthful conversations that we, like these, that we actually really want to have.
This is the second group, but hold that for the.
Sorry.
Sorry. Keep going.
I completely agree, and I've often said in my work, particularly around EDI over the last, a number of decades, is it's not about doing different work. It's about doing what we do differently. So, you can't hire somebody over there to take care of the work. You have to do the work that we're currently doing in a different way. But this clash question is interesting. I sort of have a Venn diagram that popped into my head. And if there were a board, I'd try to draw it. So let me see if I can articulate the clash that I see happening right now. A lot of it is due to ineffective communication links between the academy and the profession that have been ineffective for a very, very, very long time. And although I believe right now some of the revolutions taking place in the academy and some of the work being done in the profession are seeking the same end game, because there is not a link between the academy and the profession that has any muscle to it, we're clashing as opposed to collaborating. And I think it goes both ways. What you are doing, what you are developing, how you are trying to solve some of the challenges come out through the students into the profession, because we have not been privy to the development of that strategy and the thinking behind those actions. We don't know how to respond and embrace the change. But then also, as we're trying to make progress in the profession and putting things in place to create some systemic change, we're not communicating that to you. So the students, the artists, are coming out and don't know how to access the support systems that exist. So it's the clash is kind of it's not a clash of vision. It's in most cases, I find in my work, it's It's that we need to be talking sooner and about sort of the beginning point of strategies and intentions.
My experience, I work at a HBCU, Historically Black College and University at Atlanta, Georgia, Spelman College. So I'm in a privy position. I work with mostly African-American, well, now all African-American women and men from Spelman and Morehouse College. So some of my concerns aren't everyone else's concerns who work in the PWI. My concern with teaching in the classroom and today's generation of students is that they don't feel they need to be revolutionary. There's a complacency in the training. This is not general, but in my experience, most of my African-American students were the best black student at their all-white school. So when they come into my program at Spelman, or our program at Spelman College, I have to teach them how to rhythmically be black again, and that it's okay to be black and to accept themselves. So being revolutionary for them is just them showing up in the skin that they're in and being okay with that and not trying to be the best Becky that they can be. Because they're gonna hire Becky. Becky's gonna walk in the room right behind them. So I need them to be the Shanisha, you know, be the best Shanisha you can be, you know. The other issue I'm having is that, you know, I'm a professional actor in Atlanta and around Atlanta, mostly TV and film now. And what I found is that the students, they're not interested in process, they're interested in the product. So they don't want to go through the incubator. And reality television and things like that have made it, and YouTube have made it easy to be a star and forget process. But what we're trying to have them do is a revolutionary idea and have a sustainable career, whether you're paid or not, and to be okay with not being paid to do the thing that you felt like you were put on this earth to do, and be okay with that. In my career, I've found much joy, probably more joy in doing the free stuff than I have the stuff that I've gotten paid a lot of money to do. And it's putting that into their psyche that's revolutionary, to be okay to affect change in themselves and around themselves and with each other. So.
I guess I see the Clash as sort of as infrastructural, and the way I guess I would think about the Clash a little bit is that, and maybe it's the way that question was posed or that theme was posed, is that you know, I think that in the classroom, right? I think that's the most easy way, at least for me, to democratize, because in some sense it's me undoing myself as a teacher or the authority figure, and that's comfortable for me. So that's not the hardest place to do that kind of, that radical undoing, which I think we just have to admit now, like it's gone to shit and we have to rebuild something else. And we're in the moment where we have to figure out how to rebuild something else. And we've done a lot of undoing, and that undoing is great, but as someone who's in a school where there's a lot of a process of undoing, like the thing is, okay, like what's the next thing that we're going to build? And inevitably, we have to take the radical work perhaps into structures that aren't so radical. And so I think it's a constant toggle between what one might call like a sort of a revolutionary and a reformist set of attitudes, and sort of toggling between that to make the kind of like sort of structural change that people are talking about. And I think that can be sort of dizzying for our students to have to toggle between those modes, and even dizzying for our colleagues to have to be between those modes. So I think that's the complicated thing. And I mean, I feel like the subtext of this conversation so far has been diversity and or sort of socioeconomic diversity, inclusion. And I think that's always the conversation, but I think if we don't approach it with some structural competence and some real respect for the very affective difference in terms of these different modes of trying to make change that we toggle between, that we're really just serving ourselves in terms of being able to do the sort of longitudinal work. So like, I think that's what's hard, and I think that by design or by our own unwillingness, you could decide which it is, and it would probably be different for everyone in the room. I think we've not let ourselves learn this structural competence because or we've been taught to not learn the structural competence, so we can't actually change things, and that might change according to what your identity is and where you work. So I think that's hard work, and it's not very sexy, and like that's not what lights fires under people's asses. But it's what we're going to have to do, right? Because we're going to have to rebuild from the rubble, like and that's where we are.
Did you have something?
Well, I appreciate you saying that, Patricia, because it's ugly work and people get tired of it. So, and nobody wants to talk about being tired, but I do because I'm tired. And what I mean by tired is it's a physical labor, it's a psychical labor, it's an emotional labor, and as you know, the only faculty of color, and now I'm in administration, I've led my unit, and I like doing the ugly structural work because it's the only thing that guarantees sustainable change. But if my body walks away from the labor and the work, I've got to have guarantees that my colleagues want it as bad as I do. And when they get tired, they're willing to lose sleep, lose time on their phone, lose time with their family to get the work done. And it's emotional work. Students of color in predominantly white institutions need infinitely more support because there's no support. And the support can just be showing up. It's not just the financial support. It's like if you build the diversity, it will come. No, it won't. If you hire the people without the infrastructural support and change, they will leave. We will leave. And so, I think in order, and I appreciate Patricia saying that's the undercurrent, let it be a truthful conversation, that we need all of us to want to lose sleep, to change the structure. If you get bored and you're like, well, I don't want to talk about race today, I'm sorry. I'm really sorry.
Yeah.
That was good. Did you have something, Laura? I thought I saw like a rising up. One of the things that I think is fun about the conversation, and I mean that both in like a visceral way, but then also in an intellectual way that I'm hearing, is this what Patty sort of termed as the radical undoing, and I heard a bit of what everyone else in that group was saying and how that happens. And I'm kind of curious if you could give me even just like one or two ideas for us to throw out there into the larger universe. Like how does one even just start with it, even a radical undoing of oneself to do the work? I'm just curious. Just say it.
Yeah, we've been real polite up here.
All right, just say it.
Be uncomfortable, man. I mean, in my daily life, my daily walk, I'm forced to think about my skin color every day. I sit down in restaurants. This happened in Memphis just last week. I was sitting down with three folks. I was at this conference with that Black Theater Network, and this thought comes to my head all the time. I see a white gentleman or a white lady across the counter of a certain age, and I think, in my parents' lifetime, they couldn't sit at the same counter with that person. And I wonder if that person has those thoughts. And I don't know why I have those thoughts, but I can't stop thinking about it when I walk into a space and I feel uncomfortable. And so sometimes I want some white folks to come over to Compton or Inglewood and just be uncomfortable. You might not be welcome, but you might be surprised how welcome you are actually once they find out what you're doing. You say, I just want to be uncomfortable for a minute. I want to see what this feels like, because I feel that way all the time. Did I answer your question?
Yes.
I think positive things you can do is just do the work. I mean, I think the magical questions of, if only I could find out where the play is, or if only I could know where I would find a qualified person to do this. These questions are really old. I mean, now we even have the internet. I think because the world is, look at this room. Like this is the truth of the world, and the fact that it goes back to the power question of you want to maintain, one wants to maintain a power structures that reinforce particular types of ideals. And I think to be revolutionary, you have to be willing to say, why do you think the way you do? And why is that so valuable to you? What is so threatening to you that makes you so uncomfortable that me being here and working with you makes you feel somehow like your worldview is radically changed in a way that you can't handle it? I think honesty is really important.
I have a particular challenge as someone who runs a labor union, which has a construct that is, governed and scrutinized. National Labor Relations Board, they're under threat. Labor unions across the country, right to work. We've got, the National Labor Relations Board right now is particularly terrifying. And it's a construct that is very, very, very old. But it is like the epitome of democracy. It is a membership organization that is governed by the members. That construct, although it's very old, does in its essence have some of the answers to what could be helpful moving it forward. So we're trying to take advantage of what we have and what is innate and undo it a bit so that it responds to the moment. And this idea of being uncomfortable describes my daily activities. It's uncomfortable a lot in the work. Nobody wakes up in the morning to call their union and say, how you doing? Are you having a good day? My day's going great. Now, any of you are welcome that are members to call me tomorrow and say, I'm having a great day. But it just doesn't happen. I mean, we are problem solvers. And we are fighters. And we're fighters for artists who are vulnerable at all times. I was given a question earlier to consider, like, in this time of scarcity and revolution, and it's like, it's really no different. The problem with artists is that you are always vulnerable because you're driven by a kind of passion and need to do the work, which means that you will do it for free, and maybe at times that makes sense, but you will do it and you will willingly be taken advantage of if it means your vision can become manifest or you think it can kind of go somewhere. You're your own worst enemies in that sense. So this idea of protecting in this old construct while making it porous enough. Several years ago, we did a survey to our membership, issues of EDI, and they're not the only issue. The intersection of workplace conduct, EDI, structural power, political engagement, there's a lot of stuff going on. But in the EDI world, we did a survey to our membership, and the first one of the questions was, how important is this on a scale of 1 to 10? And I got calls from members who were not happy that we were even asking the question. Like, how can you ask that question? And the truth was we were about to put some money into a certain kind of work when we realized that as a membership organization, we actually have to ask the membership. We can't just top down from the executive board to the membership some decisions. So we had to ask the question. What was fascinating was it had like a 75% response. Any of you who do surveys, I mean, it was a quick survey, but still the number of responses it was unbelievable. There was one member out of some, 800 or 1,200 that responded that said, don't spend any money on this. There was one. So in the spirit of sort of being uncomfortable and radical, that could have been a moment like, what would have happened if 50% of the respondents had said, don't spend any money on this? And honestly, 90% of the membership's white. And most of it is white men between 50 and 70. So the fact that those were the results that we received was very affirming, but it was a moment that could have been really terrible. So
I want to make sure that I leave enough space. So Patty, I'm going to come back for you in a little bit. Unless you have something awesome and shorty tidbitty.
It's not short or articulate, so just...
Okay. So maybe what I'll do is I'll come back to you when we get into the bigger, larger conversation. Hopefully maybe it'll be more articulate by then. Yay. So I want to switch off to our last group, and we're going to hopefully bring up Magda so that we can see and hear her, and worst case scenario, we will have her call in if that doesn't work. But group 3 has the theme of seeking alternative models to forge responsive dialogue. And in some respects, I'm going to go back to my default question. What does that look like? Especially considering some of the really interesting places where in organizations you all represent. And Magda, hopefully you can hear me. Thoughts? To forge responsive dialogue. And in some respects, I'm going to go back to my default question. What does that look like? Especially considering some of the really interesting places where in organizations you all represent. And Magda, hopefully you can hear me. Yes, we can hear you. There's some weird thing popped up in the dialogue. And in some respects, I'm going to go back to my default question. During some of the really interesting places where in organizations you all represent. And Magda, hopefully
This is what a HowlRound is?
Yes, we can hear you. There's some weird thing. Okay. HowlRound is? So we'll toss it down that way first, and then I'll figure out a better way to interact with Magda. Does that sound like a good idea? How about that?
I'm speaking first. Hi, again, Kelvin Dinkins coming from the Yale School of Drama. When we talk about alternative models, we are in the midst of the completion of our first curriculum review. So we do one every 5 years, and the chairs of the departments looked very different 5 years ago in terms of the racial makeup of the voices in the room determining that pedagogical impact that comes with a curriculum review. So when we're talking about alternative models, for us it looks like re-engaging with our student community, our alumni community, as well as our faculty members that are present to talk about what is missing. We were tasked this year by the dean to go in and talk about how EDI impacts our curriculum, right? How it impacts our syllabi, what plays we're choosing to study, what scene work the acting department is working on, what for theater management looks like representation in the faculty members we select and recruit to be a part of our community. So for us, it became an examination of our current practices and whose voice was not at the table. And the best way to approach that and to engage was to go back to our community and have focus groups with all of our students, with our alumni and faculty members, so that that change could come about and not just be from on high, so to speak. And now being in the room now where we have 2 chairs of color who are now in the department making changes and responding to the very real concerns that the students are bringing up consistently. I think we've given our students more than anything a platform to speak about the inequities that structurally have existed for so long and for so many years before they got there, that we have been open to the conversation in a different way that hasn't been done in many years. We are tackling EDI in a very strategic way. We work predominantly with art equity, which does a lot of training for our students, and it's required training for all of our students and all benefited full-time employees at the School of Drama. And that is a significant shift, and it's taken a couple of years to make sure that all of those people were represented. So now we've all gone through the training, right? And now the students are asking, what's next? What happens? We have an EDI working group that is representative throughout the entire YSD community, so students, staff, and faculty are welcome to join that EDI working group. And the students are challenging the very nature of that structure as well. And asking, what are we here for? What are we really talking about? Why are we gathering together so that we can avoid an EDI working group looking like a white learning space, so that students of color don't have to carry that burden on their own. And what it takes is leadership at the top. See, we have 4 deans now. 2 are younger people of color who are now involved in these conversations and having a response and not saying, well, that'll have to wait until next year, or we don't have the funding to do that. That's not true. Right? We can be actionable in that moment and take the students' advice into consideration. So to be clear, this is my first year at the School of Drama, and this is my first time walking into an institution that has said, we know what racism is, we know what white supremacist culture looks like, we understand racism, and we want to undo the structural inequities that have been in place. This is the first time as a person of color working in theater management and producing that I've been greeted by that and not expected to tackle that by myself. So that is a welcome change when we talk about how we can just change the structures, is that you can now make sure that your leadership is accountable and open to that change, is open to being challenged in a very sensitive framework. Because what we are talking about and what we haven't said yet is when we hear diversity, where does our mind go? We talk about race, and we need to talk about racism because we don't all have similar definitions of what those things look like. I don't believe that we can just survive on EDI alone, right? I think we must become anti-racist institutions, and we must acknowledge and name that in the room, especially in the curriculum that's being designed for the theatrical training of our future artists and our future leaders and managers in this country. So that the structural change that we're talking about, these new innovative models that have to happen, come from partnerships like this, of being engaged with organizations like TCG and SDC and local colleges and universities and saying there is a problem, there's always been a problem, but this generation of next artists and students who are coming through aren't going to tolerate it in the same ways as it has been. And so being open to that and being excited and energized by that is the kind of structural change that we need. You need partners. If your organization is predominantly white, get out of that organization and start finding other partners who can come in and help you through this journey.
So I'm going to just jump in here where, as a representative, as the first ever diversity director for Actors Equity Association, which is the labor union for actors and stage managers nationally in professional live theater. Actors Equity, the buy-in is there where we released a study in 2017 when I was hired, where it was done over 3 years to look at the systematic and hiring biases that potentially occur within the industry. And what we found is that women and people of color don't get as much of the opportunities, and when they do, they receive lesser pay. So with me coming on board, my role essentially is to foster the two-pronged approach where we're looking to diversify the union as well as encourage those conversations to foster diversity and inclusion for the broader theater community. What that means is, for me, what is diversity? A lot of people don't really understand what diversity is. There are primary and secondary dimensions of what diversity is. There are EEO laws that protect certain classes when it comes to race, age, sexual orientation, gender identity, national origin. So we're doing this with intent where it's not just, okay, we're going to hire a diversity director and that's just what it is. There's a lot of intent behind it. Actors Equity is in a position with me coming on board, building a department where we're putting out a lot of forward-thinking strategies. We're having these focus groups and meeting with underrepresented groups, whether it's the transgender community, whether it's the hard of hearing or deaf community, people of color, the Latinx community, Hispanic, whatever that looks like. So there's a number of things that are happening to create the change. But what I'm finding with my engagement with the membership and other people in the industry is that they don't fully understand what diversity means. And once we're able to translate that, once we're able to bring awareness to what implicit and explicit biases that we all have conscious and unconscious bias based on our experiences, our upbringing. It's not anything to say that, pointing fingers at anyone to say that you're bad because you think a certain way, but when you look at it, really honing in on identifying and understanding and celebrating and embracing what diversity is and how it makes better business sense, and it's not something that you're being forced to do, will foster that paradigm shift.
Do you want to chime
We're
in?
able to translate that once we're able to bring awareness to what implicit.
Go for it. Okay, hold 1 second. We're having a hard time.
Hearing you now. Do you know what we can do so that
We can read it aloud, and we can read it aloud, yeah.
She has to use her computer in order to communicate. Oh, this computer?
I don't think it's that.
Do you know what we can do? Can you turn off your live stream for a second? And then I'm going to get off with you, and I think that'll help us hear you better. So I'm going to hang up with you on Facebook, and then you talk, and that should actually help. Ready? Bye.
Hello, everyone. So the question for me was, how do we structure the theater times, which is our global theater portal, and the goal, the objective, the goal for creating the theater portal was not so much, as the question suggested, to combat the American sense of exceptionalism, but rather to just improve in general our global theater literacy, and also help us gain some perspective on some of the issues which we are struggling with here in this particular country. So I know it's not always the case, but we are trying to have the editors and authors writing from their own perspectives, from the countries in which they are located or they live in or they grew up in, so they understand the language and the cultures from which they are writing about. And it's fairly unfiltered. I don't really use much editorial, curatorial structures too much. I trust my editors to pick and choose and discuss issues which they think are important for their culture and from the perspective which they deem appropriate. And so I think that in some way, that trust is important, and the trust is essential in creating a kind of collaborative infrastructure that we are trying to develop. And we are trying to be merely a kind of a vessel for those ideas and a tool of connection rather than a tool for my editorial voice. It tries to build a kind of polyphonic of voices. And I think it has helped me, at least, and from what I'm hearing, many others, to also put some of the questions that we are struggling professionally in both academia and in theater in context and also in perspective. The issues of race, disability, gender addressed in the U.S. context are very different than when addressed in a global context. And So having this dialogue is helping us to kind of see, see things with some perspective and maybe help find solutions which we would not be able to think about before. And so this was, this was the main goal why we created this portal. Now, the second question that I was asked is, how do I imagine the future for, people of color and disabled and LGBT communities? This is a bad question to ask me since I'm not a particularly optimistic person about, the future of humanity. I don't know about structural changes. I think that they will always be there, the structures that you have to kind of struggle against. I cannot imagine in my lifetime that there won't be any barriers for me. And it's a kind of, hopeless situation in many ways, but also, there is only one life, so you kind of have to push through it. I think that my advice would be that, the institutions, if they don't want you in their sandbox, you have to try to create your own sandbox that's better and bigger and brighter than the other ones. So that's sort of how I'm seeing this. You cannot make somebody do something you don't want to do. All you can do is just, be responsible for your own things. And so it's very difficult to talk about how these institutions that have been around for a long, long, long time, how they will change because they are structured to perpetuate themselves in some way. And so my suggestion and advice maybe would be to try to maybe create alternative institutions and ones that are better and maybe more responsive to the future and to the forthcoming generational change that is happening. That's sort of how I'm seeing this.
Yeah, thinking about this as well, and also thanks for the opportunity to be here and to think about this alongside such an amazing panel. I mean, I think that actually I want to echo a lot of what Kelvin was saying, because I think I'm at an institution not dissimilar in a space of sort of in a very a space that has been very historically privileged in terms of who we're producing as students. And I think one of the things that I did, I've been there slightly longer than you, about 2 years, but one of the first things that we did was to do sort of an entire curriculum review, and not looking just at the curriculum, but looking at who are the teachers on everything, who are visiting lecturers, adjuncts, what are all the points of contact that the students have with everything. With their courses. What is day one of their first year to the end of however long that particular course is? And to really ask the students and the alumni, and to really set up those same focus groups and think about what are the questions that need to be approached, and look at where those come from, and to look at the pipelines that on both ends of that. We're a small institution. We're about 1,000 students, and that's all over the map. From our largest undergraduate programs, our Drama Applied Theater and Education program is about 100 students a year. And that program relies on sending the students out into communities for a large portion of their middle year. In the UK, it's a 3-year program. And they spend we've gotten funding we've gotten external funding so that those can be global placements. So we have students working. I have colleagues here who are working with students at Hillbrow in Cape Town, working in Palestine, working sort of all over the world to sort of really look at the questions and look at the possibilities that they can do, and really let the students lead on what they want to do on their knowledge. And I think those are, that's where we need to go, is to be sort of listening and open to the partnerships and the possibilities. And I just want to listen to the partnerships and the possibilities we have on this stage today and see where those go.
Great, thank you. So what other thoughts do you all have for each other? Or are there other conversations or through lines that we want to kind of come back to? Because I saw some people frantically taking notes, and I know at one point Nicole Smith was like, I saw that you were very invested in something that was happening. Oh, Nicole Smart, sorry. I don't know why, I don't know where.
No, it's okay. I wanted to say, just to other Nicole on the panel, I'll be Nicole too. All right, so we all know that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? You've heard that term before. And when it comes to diversity and inclusion or equity, diversity and inclusion initiatives, it's never an easy fix. And I think part of the problem with presenting any type of initiative, everyone's looking for a quick turnaround, where it's something where you're changing the mindset, you're changing a system, you're changing the way people think, you're looking at bias, unconscious bias, implicit, explicit, however you want to look at it, barriers. These are not things that are going to go away. There's a process that needs to take place when it comes to selection process, when you're hiring your educators, when you're selecting students, when you're in the labor union and you're looking to hire people. There are different methods and processes that needs to be looked at when you're looking to facilitate any kind of change when it comes to diversity and inclusion, but to keep in mind that it is simply not an easy fix, because there are a number of things that are involved that needs to be changed. So just want to make that point.
Yeah, I was going to respond to Nicole 1. That one of the things that you brought up and we probably didn't speak about, and I, at our last Black Theater and Dance Symposium in Maryland, and then at the Black Theater Network, did a couple of workshops on racial battle fatigue. So when we're out in the trenches doing this kind of work with diversity and inclusion, there's only so much that you can give before you do break down. And another just is a wonderful book called Presumed Incompetence, if anyone's read that book or knows that book, especially for Black women in academia, which they, after they become racially and battle fatigued, they transfer them out for a new model. So Monica might do all the work, and then all of a sudden she doesn't get tenure, and they bring in a newer model because they know there's just so few academics of color that are going to do the work. So there's these things, and then going into that is then you have to battle yourself, white fragility, by bringing up these issues. So there's 3 terms that I find myself always getting to the roadblocks from what you guys found. So I don't know if it resounds to anyone.
So there's a lot I want to say, but I won't say all of it. One of the reasons why I pitched this panel or this plenary and the follow-up is because I think it's really important that we do begin to bridge the divide between what's happening in academia and what's happening in the professional theater. So I just want to say thank you all for being here, and I do hope this goes beyond a conversation, because there are some very real things that we can do in order to move things forward. One of those, I started an organization called the Craft Institute that will help facilitate the bridging between academia and the professional theater in terms of overhauling formal training. And so I'm very much looking forward to tomorrow's plenary, which will be a follow-up to this, and we can share some more about that. But one of the other things I also wanted to note is when we're talking about diversity and hiring and these structural items, one of the things that I also want to encourage people to think about is that very often a lot of these institutions will try to get around, like we have to really acknowledge that racism is a very real thing. And some institutions will try to get around dealing with that and address diversity in terms of all of these other forms of identity, without actually addressing the ways in which race has been a barrier in terms of fusing new blood and new ideas and new worldviews into institutions. And so I encourage you to think in terms of culture, you know, because you can have various identities, racial identity, cultural identity, economic identity, but also thinking about how we can bring in new ideas in a way that does not still perpetuate racism. So you still have to confront that, even if you're looking at the diversity of all of these other intersectional identities. So I just want to make sure that that's clear.
I also think, and maybe this will come up tomorrow, but the next step being sort of the employers, right? I mean, this is an amazing group of people here, and then there are the people that actually do the hiring, produce the work, you know, set the stage. I quickly mentioned our demographic earlier, and I do want to say, clarify, you can't be a member of SDC, a full member, contract filing union member, unless you're employed. So we don't control the demographic of our membership. The employers do. Now we handle our associate membership because that's not a contract filing, and the demographics in that are 50% women, 50% men. I mean, the demographics in the associate, where we have some measure of influence, is a different thing. But in our membership, it's who gets employed. And so how we sort of there's another bridge, right, from in these worlds that I think is sort of important. And I will say I worry, because I think you guys are doing an extraordinary job, even though it feels probably harrowing at times. But I meet on a regular basis with directing students out of the MFA programs, with many people sitting up here and in this room. And I can say that classes of directing students over the last decade and the diversity and inclusion within that student body, it's fantastic and thrilling. And I know how few of them are going to work, or they're going to work until just a certain point, and they're not going to break through the barriers into actually making a living. So that's where I feel like we've got to penetrate through that barrier so that the students that you're training and wrestling with right now will be able to get beyond the poverty level in this industry.
I think we are in such a unique position at the Yale School of Drama. We are conservatory that runs a professional regional theater, so that bridge is internal, right? We sort of have that walkway, and we try and demonstrate that for the practice, a lot of these issues are going to become relevant. We are training the next generation of theater managers and leaders with EDI in mind, that it's very much a part of your curriculum, but also a part of your practice. And so I'm very interested in how we partner with our colleagues across the field, including the League of Resident Theaters, that does a lot of this employment, and how we find partners in the industry being so important to this conversation, that we're not just championing diversity, but we're displaying it in the work that we do. We talk about the hiring decisions that we are making and understanding what the needs of this generation of student, turned practitioner are. We are talking about a lot of the structural barriers right now, and even Magda commented on that. We, for the first time, have admitted into our acting program a student who uses a wheelchair. And for us, that is so much about the curriculum of acting training now, right? Is how do you accommodate and how do you involve and make sure that the student is integrated into the learning in a very real way that doesn't isolate them, right? And they are learning it in the classroom. The students are hungry for the training in terms of working with actors with disabilities and developing this curriculum of inclusive actor training. And hearing from consultants in New York that we're working with that this work is sometimes unprecedented. And that is the most sobering part of this work, is understanding that we're not just giving you the tools as students to make change, but to make change in rehearsal rooms when folks are being hired to act, because the student will be hired, right? They will go out into the world and they will work because as a result of people being more mindful that they also have needs. You know, we are changing buildings, like actual structural barriers at our institution right now that we are overseeing with our operations team because we have to be inclusive. And again, being a part of, you know, again, we are a theater within a conservatory. This actress has to be able to get between the downstairs basement where the dressing rooms are up to the stage. We have to build that elevator. We have to take time out of that schedule. We have to do this work. So it's about priority for us, you know, because I hear a lot, and just to comment on what someone else said earlier, is that people say that this work is tiring, it's exhausting. I'm one of the younger people up here and just arriving into this conversation and saying this is new for me. Right, that I'm here now and we're here now together, that we have this opportunity to say we can't just rest on what's been said for the past 20 years. We have to move forward. And we're talking about people's livelihood, right? Their capacity to live, to learn, to, I think, pursue their passions. So that exhaustion is for a very real cause. Right? And it's why we thrive in education, it's why we thrive in our art, it's why we thrive in our theaters. It's because we have that capacity to do that and make people's dreams come true. And that should be absolutely a professional imperative.
Really quickly, I just want to throw something in that Magda just texted me. She says, she was like, she wants everyone to know that she was the first student in a wheelchair at the Yale School of Drama and the first faculty in a wheelchair at the Yale School of Drama. And she said that, I'm going to quote her. She says, "Hell, there was nothing wheelchair accessible when I got there, and I helped make those changes possible." She says the library wasn't even wheelchair accessible at Yale, which made her time there quite challenging. So she just wanted me to make sure that I inserted that in there. So she is both like advocating and saying yay about the progress that has happened there since then.
Yeah, I just want to say people with disabilities are certainly an untapped pool of talent. Ali Stroker was one of the first actors on Broadway that was able to take on a role. So we're still breaking barriers in our industry, but we're having the conversations, and when I say we, equity, we're having the conversations with people with disabilities. We recently had a counselor, or have a counselor, John McGinty, who is the first deaf counselor that is on our governance structure, because equity is made up where we have staff and we have counselor, governing body, where a lot of what happens is voted on. So I will say, when it comes to people with disabilities, yes, we're faced with what happens when a person with a disability, regardless of having blind or low vision, deaf or hard of hearing, not having an ASL interpreter, they're at a disadvantage. Number one, there's a certain level of risk and stigma that's associated when you're looking at people with disabilities because of perceptions, because of fear, because of the unknown, and oh, this is going to cost me some money. So it's our jobs as professionals to try to eliminate those perceptions, and that will help foster eliminating a lot of the barriers. But those are some of the conversations that we're having, and people with disabilities, again, definitely an untapped pool of talent that's out there and ready to work. So.
Thank you. I think Magda also wants to join in the conversation. She had some thoughts that she wanted to share. I think we need to get her back up on the screen, if possible.
A lot of the barriers, but those are some of the conversations that we're having. And
I thought you wanted to talk,
again,
Magda,
definitely
about
an untapped pool of talent that's out there and ready to work.
Okay.
Thank you. I think Magda also wants to join in the conversation. She had some thoughts that she wanted to share.
We can.
I think we need to get her back up on the screen.
The
if
feedback
possible.
out. She said that it's a complicated issue, and
A lot of the barriers,
that she would start a whole conversation if we open up that can of worms. So, other thoughts before we? Go for it.
I was laughing to Martin because when I was a student at Yale, that was in 2001, so that was like 18, 17 years ago, you know, there was not a big conversation about this going on. There was me and some construction guys putting on the ramp, you know, I remember, you know, everybody was extremely supportive, And the main issue was just to get the things done, like without really, thinking about it too much or trying to build an ideology of do-gooding, around it. Like I don't really, I was always, saying, like, I don't really need emotional support. I'm pretty fine. I need the RAM. Like, I think people sort of often mistake the kind of, virtue signaling with the actual resources that people need. Like, what does it mean welcoming environment? Like, are you gonna make me a cookie or something? Like, no. Like, pay people appropriately to their qualifications, make sure that they can get to their spaces, value their labor the way you would value the labor of a, older white guy, just do it. And it's not really that difficult. Back in 2001, Yale there was no ideology about inclusivity and diversity around it. They were just doing it. They're like, okay, what do you need? Do you need the ramp here? Do you need the lift here? Do you need to get here? Do you need to get there? And people kind of work together and just sort of, like I had to communicate what my needs were, and we sort of muddled through it, And that's sort of part of that is just to communicating and just making those logistical, because like politics and we talk about like structural issues, but really it's just logistics, frankly. It's just logistics of doing things, And so what are those logistics? Just make people's lives easier. If you invite them to your spaces, just make their lives easier by not, questioning their needs or by not making them, work too hard to get to the spaces that you want them to get to. And so it's not that complicated. Like we always, there is this kind of a presumption that disability in particular is so costly, that inclusivity around disability is so costly and it costs so much money. It's not more cost, it doesn't cost more than any other progress that we've been making. The busing costs money. Yeah, I mean the expanding benefits to their partners and spouses was costly, and so there is a perception that disability is especially costly, but it's not, because in some way everyone in this room and everywhere else is a potential person with disability. I mean, you go out there, you get, hit by a car, and welcome to the club, yeah? And so, like, it's a condition of being that cuts across race and gender and sexuality and age, and it requires a certain awareness of your own body and of your own vulnerability in the spaces that you are in. That you might, it's a very, you, your child, your husband, everybody can become disabled in a moment. And so, how would you navigate this world with that in mind? So that's, and I kind of, I was kind of somewhat semi-joking with Martine about those, who's the first student at Yale with disability on the wheelchair, yeah? And that's, I mean, it's like, patting yourself on the back. I mean, I don't know, like, I was first at many things, just because, of my age, but also because of the times that I grew up in. But it's nothing to be proud of to be first. It's like, oh my God, it took so long, It took so long. I'm kind of embarrassed that it's like I have to be the first one sometimes. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Short thing. I'm sitting here, and maybe it's because I work in an institution with an undergrad degree that's a liberal arts degree and not a BFA, but when I hear about like sort of the work that's happening at Yale, certainly the work that's happening at Brown Trinity in terms of EDI, I mean, we're also working with Art Equity, actually. I'm just really aware that I think sometimes the kind of work we're asking of students, and I'm very aware of the fatigue and on students of color who spend all their time teaching their professors how not to be racist, classist, and sexist, and they're tired. I wonder if that's not fundamentally a different kind of work sometimes for graduate students than undergraduates, especially in so-called degree programs in which they're professionalizing simultaneously, and they have a much more heterogeneous position in terms of labor in that sense, right? You know, if the NLRB ruling stands, which with the current NLRB it may not, that students can simultaneously hold the category of both worker and student simultaneously, I think we really have to wrestle with what that means and how then doing the sort of so-called free labor of teaching their own instructors about how they're aggressing them constantly might fall into a different category of work, given that sometimes they are paid employees for actors' equity on the stage as part of their MFA training. They might also be receiving a stipend for being teachers. So it's actually really complicated, and I think unless we get clear on categories of work, we're not going to solve some of these long-range infrastructural sort of sustainable changes that so many people on this panel are talking about. So that's more of a provocation or a question, but I do think it's something that I struggle with answering in order to do the work that I do.
No, thank you.
We're in the process of organizing associate resident directors on Broadway. And part of what, and I think, and we're part of the Department of Professional Employees, which is affiliated with the AFL, and so spend some time talking with, it's like the steel workers are organizing graduate students or something.
They're actually a better union, so they should.
Yeah, so.
The benefits are better.
Yeah, so but it's kind of interesting when you get around the table and you kind of hear how they're doing it. But it occurs to me that, and one of the prompts I'd been given earlier was this question of, is there anything that we're doing that the Academy can learn in terms of organizing this particular, or dealing with this particular labor and internships and fellowships and all of that. And what we've found that has been extremely successful, and don't tell the producers, but you know, we're almost there, is to understand that the work of the associate resident director on Broadway, which didn't really exist in the way that it does today 10 years ago, 20 years ago, is actually a job. For a long time had been talked about as an opportunity, as a path to something else, and as long as it's a path exclusively, then it's not deemed sort of as work by folks. But as soon as you can take that person out of the team and the construct crumbles because it actually isn't it's not an opportunity, it's a job. Now it may be a job that eventually can be leveraged into some other job, but it's a job. And it took a while for me to actually get the associates to be willing to talk about it as a job, because they want to be Broadway directors, right? They didn't at this point grow up to be an associate. They're on their way to something bigger. But we had to get them to realize that what they were doing was work in and of itself, and might be work they could do their whole lives. And honestly, it's been progressing so quickly, they're highly paid, and it's a pretty darn good job. But and then that, when we talk about diversity and increased employment and increased opportunity, because right now the only way to get to the top of the ranks in this business really is to come from a certain class.
Nicole, right before you start, I just want to let people know, if you're interested in asking a question, we're getting really close to that point, so please join us at the mics that are in the opposite aisles so that we can honor your question. Continue.
Right. So I just wanted to go back to the Actors' Equity empirical study that was done. And this study was done from January 2013 to December 2015, so over 3 years. And what we found is that only out of 51,000 members in our membership, only a little over 200 identified as having a disability. When you look at the U.S. population, 20% of the U.S. population has some form of disability, visible, invisible. I actually have an invisible disability as well, but you will never be able to tell that. So with that said, you know, we have a responsibility, or even educators have a responsibility, to challenge those societal norms when you look at people with disabilities. I had an interaction with someone earlier this week where they wanted my advice on something that was written and talked about feeling less than and feeling not normal or whatever that felt like. And as a person with disability, it does not make you any different from anyone sitting here on this panel, anyone in this room. We're all a part of a human race. We just have differences. That's what diversity is all about. So I challenged this person to actually revise what they were trying to say as far as feeling less than normal and putting the onus on society. Why does society have to look at a person with disability as someone that's not normal, as they would put it? You know what I mean? So when it comes to the education piece and any EDI initiative, part of that goes to just structuring a curriculum or programming or however you do it to just challenge those stereotypes that are out there for people with disabilities. Just wanted to make that point.
Thank you. I am going to turn my hand mic over to KJ, just in case if there's anyone with if you cannot actually come up to physically to the microphone, just let us know, throw a hand up in the air and wave it around like you just don't care, so that we can make sure that we get your voice in the conversation as well.
Yeah, I'm David Wiles. I teach at Carleton College as an equity member since 1973, and as a teacher a couple of institutions since 1994. I'm filled with questions, but I'm going to try to confine myself at this moment to this one. When it comes to dealing with students of color at predominantly white institutions, how do we communicate with all of the students at those institutions in ways that can lead our students of color to think of themselves as something other than present to provide a diverse learning experience for their white peers? That is absolutely, you know, I think of a generation of students as 4 years, because they show up as freshmen, 4 years later they're gone. I've been at my institution now for pushing 15 years. I've heard this so many times. We feel like we're here to provide a diverse learning experience. And I serve on a committee that deals with diversity at Carleton, and I raised this question recently. Maybe we should shift the question and stop asking ourselves why we want a diverse student body, and start asking ourselves why we want diverse graduating classes. Because if we think we're offering something of value in an education, we're sending that value out into those valuable people out into the world. What difference does it make that we are sending every year a diverse group of people out into the world where they're going to take their education and hopefully make a difference? Because that's a really, for me, a really different perspective. Not why do we have a diverse group of students here, why are we graduating a diverse class every year? Because I think that the students who were there are not there to provide a diverse learning experience for their white peers. They're there to get an education and move on. But they get communicated to them, I believe, by the administration, to some degree by the faculty, that no, it's nice that you're here. Which leads me to another question. They deal with this, but God, I've been dealing with this question for so long. How do we treat especially domestic students of color as if they are not guests in their own house? This is my house. You don't need to tell me that I'm welcome in it. It's my house. And I have bitten the heads off of some people, well-intentioned, who thought it was really important to tell me how welcome I was in my house because they treat it like it's their house and I'm their guest, and I'm not. And I think that we treat way too many students of color on predominantly white campuses as, you're welcome, come in. Well, yeah, well, you know, I'm from here, right? It's my house. So stop telling me how welcome I am in my home. Stop acting like you own it. And I'm saying this in this setting because white conservatives don't talk to black people this way. You know, only white progressives talk to black people this way. White liberals talk to black people this way because they are so eager to tell us how glad they are to have us in their house without realizing what that says to us, that they are communicating to us that this isn't our house, it's theirs. How do we, that's one potentially revolutionary change. It would be revolutionary for me because I've been dealing with it since the 1960s. If we stopped doing that.
I will let y'all answer that, respond to.
No, you go right ahead.
Okay. First of all, thank you so much for your question and your comments. One thing that I'm going to say is that what you're talking about is very real. In my circles, we call it that extra course you teach each year, Cultural Sensitivity 101. Whether it's the faculty doing it or the students who are in classes with faculty who are not acknowledging that they are limited in their understanding of how to teach a diverse classroom. So one thing I would say, how do we, the other thing that you mentioned in talking about graduating a diverse class of students is critical because we can't talk about recruiting without also talking about retention. And that's why, again, it goes back to structural, creating an infrastructure that will support those students. Part of that infrastructure, within my view, is educating students and thinking about audience. So when I'm teaching a class, it's something very real I had to think about. Who is the audience when I'm teaching my class? And am I teaching my material in a way that's going to make the white students feel more comfortable as opposed to the students of color? So how do we do that for students of color? They need to become the center of our focus when we're teaching. We need to provide them with all the materials and resources and information they need to know to better understand their existence or to think more about their existence, but not in a way that's centering white students and the institution and making the institution look good, because I think that's part of the main thing, a critical shift in who the audience is for who we're teaching. All students benefit from that because in the process of learning about people of color and all that they've contributed, then you begin to understand that, yes, we did build this house, and as I said in the previous session, we can barely get a mat on the porch to sleep. You know, if we're thinking about nationally, what we have done in terms of helping to build the nation, and also these institutions, sometimes in very literal ways. Some of these institutions were built by the hands of enslaved Africans. And so until we acknowledge that history, and we stop trying to hide it and pretend it doesn't exist so we can move on, then we're going to continue to have this situation where it's framed in such a way that everything belongs to white America. Anybody else is sort of tangential to that central experience. So once that decentering occurs and we begin to acknowledge all that we have all brought to the building of the nation, the world, throughout history, that's the way that everyone begins to benefit. Because once, I think, all students that we graduate have that understanding, they're going to be more informed world citizens, and it will be that much harder to continue to practice racism and other forms of oppressive behaviors.
Can I just...
go ahead. And, you know, this has only been a generation of talking open like this. It hasn't been that long. So if you're tired, keep let's keep your head in the game. Keep your head in the game. Don't put your head down, because eventually the other side will have to start talking about it if we're talking loud enough. A lot of times at these conferences we're preaching to the choir because we're all progressive, all liberals, but we have to fight the good fight. So don't get tired of having the conversation, because the conversations need to be had. We need to be having these conversations and reminded of the atrocities, and reminded of the successes, and reminded of the commonalities. And sitting in this room for 2 hours and talking about something that seems so exhaustive, but when you leave here, don't forget about the connections that you made, the person you're sitting next to, the people you're listening to, because then the conversations you take back to your small town in Iowa or in Montana, and you have these conversations with other people who look like you, who may not have had the privilege to be in this room amongst us and have these hard conversations, because there are places in this country you can go to where you don't have to see my black ass or anybody who looks like me. You can, in a corner, you go to Oregon and just be there chilling and not have to deal with any of this conversation and think because I'm in Oregon and we're green, everything is okie-dory and fine. Right? I can't go there? I know it does. I see the videos. But so does every urban city, every urban market. But we're having the conversations in these urban cities and urban markets, and we don't think that a lot of times we don't think we're above those conversations. But I think in those lily green places, we might think we're above the conversation because everything is fine. So just keep having the conversation.
I don't know if students attend this conference or are in the rooms when you all are having this conversation, but we're about 4 weeks out from orientation ourselves. And the thing that I keep reminding myself is that imposter syndrome is real. And the students that show up to the house have been conditioned for sometimes 18, 20, 30 years, and they're showing up to your institution. And what it's like, as a student who graduated in my MFA program as the second African-American male to go through, and that's in 2011, to go through the program, is what it's like to walk into the house and see only a certain kind of people on the lawn, to walk in and see only certain types of pictures in the frames on the walls, in the family albums. How can I claim that this is my house? How do we teach our students to undo that conditioning? That is a very real task we have as educators, is undoing that conditioning that society has placed on them, that history has given to them and gifted to them, and then come into an institution that wasn't built for them and say, here you are. So I'm so mindful, and I thank you for giving me that, because I think the first day you show up at orientation, that is a defining moment to change that conversation. And I just wanted to thank you for offering that, because it's something that I was aware of as someone who's had to navigate predominantly white spaces all my life. Everyone around me has always been different than me. And I want to bring that, because I want, us to see that reflected in our staff, in faculties, and the people leading our institutions and chairing our departments. That is what welcoming looks like. That is to look around and say, I'm not different. I am the same. This is my institution, and yes, I deserve to be here. But fighting that imposter syndrome is something that we have to just confront from the get-go. And if we don't have that cultural sensitivity or cultural understanding or that competency that we're talking about and that everyone's sharing up here, and knowing that it's very real, I don't know how we can begin to tell folks that not only are you welcome, this is yours.
Yeah. Right. If I may, it takes a lot of courage to do what we do when it comes to advocating for diversity and inclusion. There is such a thing that's called diversity fatigue, where people get tired of hearing diversity, inclusion, diversity, inclusion. What does that mean? Does that mean that I have to hire the next African American or Hispanic individual? So in order to keep that going, with what you said earlier, we have to keep the momentum going. We have to keep having the conversations. We have to really fight the good fight. And I'm just going to quote something that Martin Luther King said once: the time is always right to do what is right. But you have to be committed to doing it. You have to be intent. You have to be courageous and know that, again, diversity is not an easy fix. I keep saying that over and over because there is a perception, there is a vision as far as what happens when you plop out a diversity and inclusion initiative. Okay, you know, you look at your metrics, your measures, whatever institution, industry that you're in, within 6 months we want to see it doesn't happen that way. But understand that there is something that's called diversity fatigue, and you have to be creative and innovative when it comes to the momentum of it. Just to double back a little bit, I've seen what has happened over the years. I have over 20 years experience working in affirmative action, global HR, diversity and inclusion, leadership development. That has been all through my career. And just looking back, I've seen the evolution, I've seen the trends, I've seen how affinity groups went to employee resource groups, and it's constantly evolving. But right now, we're in a political environment, and I hate to bring this up in the context of what we're talking about, where change is happening. There's a social shift happening. There is, you know, people that are coming out and speaking up. We have white allies that are speaking up for underrepresented groups. So now is the time to not just double back and say, okay, well, you know, I've been doing this for 5 or 10 years, nothing's happening, and to get discouraged. Now is the time to really ramp it up, go in, and just go for it. And I'm Brooklyn girl, so, you know, go for yours. And just do what you need to do, but there is a shift that's happening that's supportive of our initiatives, but understand that diversity fatigue is real, because it's been something I've seen over the years that we've been trying to push and trying different ways to go about it, but we're in a very interesting time in our society, in our nation, in our world, where good things are going to happen and good things are coming. I firmly believe that. So.
Thank you. Yes, out there.
Hi, Scott. I wanted to respond to your question. I was a University of Maryland student, the first African American to receive a PhD in theater. And I recall, and you said, yes, I am fatigued. I am so sick and tired of hearing people of color as if white is not a color.
Yes, absolutely.
I am sick and tired of being the other, the minority. We're not. And I think that when we're talking about revolution, we need to also look at the semantics. We need to stop using those terms as they or they and we are something else. White is the color and everybody else is something else. I remember a time when being called colored was something we hated. But now we're using people of color. I am an African American woman. If you want to talk culture, which culture you want to talk? My French culture, my Haitian culture, my Native American culture. Which piece do you want to talk about? Because at the end of the day, I am American, and as you are. And as we look at all these little DNA things now, you know, how much of what do you have? We're American. So if we want to start the revolution, let's start by working with our students. Let's start by working with each other and saying, you're American, I'm American. You're an African American, you're Black American. And stop this white and others, because that sets students up in those spaces to feel like they're not at home. I recall one particular incident where a professor said to me, I'd like for you to really work with all the minority students. I said, what are you talking about? You know, the minority students here. I said, first of all, let me remind you, I am a University of Maryland student. And I am a student who is African American or Black American. But I don't consider myself a minority. And I will not claim that. So if we want to start the revolution, stop claiming those things that are given to us and falling into the trap. Because that just perpetuates what we're dealing with, and it continues to the point where we are fatigued. Thank you.
The language is important. I think that's a really tough one. I absolutely agree. I think POC is a catch-all that really tries to take people's very specific and intersectional identities and sweep them into a easy fit catch-all that I think is really problematic. And I really don't engage the term. I ask for specificity. And then the idea that it's just, well, all the people of color over here, and then the normal people. You know, I think we have to unsettle these ideas of universals and our canons, and the fact that we say, well, there's the canonical stuff and then there's the other stuff. I mean, this is, we reify these racial and ethnic and gender and ability tropes in our language every day in our institutions. And I think that the allyship that Harvey was really charging the membership with is very important for us to consider, specifically because when non-Black, non-Latino, non-Indigenous, when allies of European descent who are perceived to have capacity amplify the important narratives of people who are striving for equal access and inclusive recognition within the spaces that they occupy, this is when change can start to happen, because the record is broken. I mean, we say it all the time. We need our colleagues to take up the space and help us at times when we are tired, where we do need a break. We don't want to bring this back to a faculty meeting. We don't want to bring it back to another board meeting or to a union meeting to say you didn't do it. Because then that's what the fatigue is, right? That people don't want to hear it, just like the Charlie Brown teacher. You know, yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Teresa?
Oh yeah, I wanted to, first of all, some of you may have heard the term people of the global majority. I wanted to just underscore that thought of the importance of white allyship and the importance of, you know, we have a way of thinking about our EDI work at TCG, which is that, and this is not just individual to us, but that there are really three levels. One is very personal and individual because people come from different backgrounds. And I'm saying this, you know, especially to white people right now, that, you know, taking the time to develop analysis, to really understand where you come from, what your assumptions are, what your biases are, and then to be able to understand things like, you know, don't expect, you know, a Black person who's in a meeting with you to explain something about being Black to you. Because, you know, don't put extra pressure on your colleagues, but so there's a lot of individual work that has to happen, but that flows into organizational or institutional understanding and creating conditions that are just much more conducive and supportive of a sense of equity and a sense of everyone being important. Everyone's views are important in the space. And then finally, if that work is done, it does flow into our ecosystem. And I feel like universities, colleges and universities have such a role to play in that, and just, you know, what Yale is doing is so important, what you're doing in London is so important. All of the schools that are really investing in making sure that the students and faculty have the training and the personal understanding of their own racism, of their own privilege. If those things are really addressed and can affect systemically what's happening at the organizational level, I think we'll start to see change. And there is a lot of change in terms of people being able to speak up for others, understand others, but at the same time, there's a huge amount of white supremacy in our country, and it isn't necessary, and people who are willing right now in this context to say whatever they want to others. And so I think the fight just has to continue. What Keith was saying about everybody leaving this room and just committing personally to the personal education, to the personal building of self-understanding is just, I think, really crucial.
Thank you. So I have the unfortunate task of letting everyone know that we're actually at time. So I wanted to take a few seconds to tell you a few things. I see that there are 2 people who are standing at microphones who wanted to ask questions. Please feel free to come up to us afterwards, or make sure you join us tomorrow at 9:45 for the part 2 of this session, and hopefully we can continue the conversation at that point. So please do that. So one of those 2 options, and I'm looking specifically at you 2 for that, yes? I'm not leading that session, so I'm going to look to Anne and see if that's a possibility. And I wanted to say thank you so much to our panelists.
Can I?
And to Magda. And,
I'm sorry. Can we just hear the questions?
Sure.
We won't answer them because we're on break and everybody's got to go, but I'd love to just hear the questions and then some of us can
You want to
say
go ahead
that.
and start since you're already there, what the question is?
Okay. I'm trying, and it's hard to make it short. I really want to be helpful. I'm not here, I'm not understanding. I think I know what some of the problems are that you've been talking about, but I'm not sure, and I'm not hearing a lot of specifics. So I keep feeling as I'm only hearing part of the story, and so I'm confused. And I really would be more helpful if I really understood specifically what it is, what are the oppressions that you're talking about.
Gotcha. So Monica just said that tomorrow we'll actually dig a little bit deeper exactly into what you're talking about. So please join us, and we will answer that question. Yes.
Hey, thanks. I'm Natalia. I'm a State University in Georgia and Kelvin's classmate from undergrad. Hey, bro. My question was really about modeling and demystifying a little bit, like Magda was talking about. And some of the panels I've listened to today and yesterday have talked more about that. I feel charged up to do that in 2 weeks when I start teaching again. But for example, I'm type 1 diabetic. I have an insulin pump, but in college I refused to get one. I just took shots because I was a dancer. I didn't want people to know or have to be burdened by the fact that I had this thing connected to me. But it's empowered me as a leader in the classroom to have it sometimes go off and be like, sorry guys, or my blood sugar is running high today. I'm going to restructure the way that class is going to go so that we can accommodate that. I think even just speaking out loud about our structural and institutional journeys in front of them is empowering too. Like, I'm tenure track now, and I remember walking into my class and being like, y'all, I'm the first tenure track Black English professor at CSU. Because I was excited, but I also, after the fact, thought, was that appropriate to say to my students? I'm like, of course, because it lets them know that this is what I'm also fighting against, and these are my goals. So, and it also to the point of not necessarily asking exclusively what can we do as an institution, but modeling outside of the institution, like, will they have that job waiting for them? Well, let's practice outside of the classroom how to build for ourselves these things that we're talking about. The theater program doesn't put a lot of minority, I know we just had that conversation, but Black plays on, et cetera. So myself and 2 students just did a reading series of Black plays just in the community outside of school to try to shout in a different direction at the powers that be and get press and stuff like that and embarrass them in the local paper, even though they employ me. But I mean, so how we model all of these things, I think, is a big part of some of that change that we're talking about too.
Thank you for sharing. I appreciate you. So I want to say thank you one more time to our panel and Magda via technology. Hopefully she can still hear me. And thank you for coming to participate. Keep the conversations going.